Alright, coming in at number 10, we have space snakes. Dr. Musgrave is a trustworthy man, or at least his credentials suggest he must be. Not only is he a NASA astronaut, he has 6 degrees, and he's a doctor and a mathematician. He has made 6 space flights, and he believes that there is life out there. In 1994, he said, "On 2 of my missions, and I still don't have an answer, I have seen a snake out there." What? It's not just a wee little space snake either. He said that it was 6, 7 or 8 feet long. He said that the snake followed him around for a long period of time and he tried to communicate with it. Space snakes, honestly. Dr. Musgrave thinks that they must have their own propulsion technique, which honestly is just baffling and is a can of worms or snakes. Coming in at number 9, we have asteroids. Astronaut Chris Hadfield conducted a Reddit AMA and he discussed something that scared him. He said, "Sometimes we hear pings as tiny rocks hit our spaceship, and also the creaks and snaps of expanding metal as we go in and out of sunlight. The solar panels are filled with tiny holes from micrometeorites." Honestly, that really terrifies me as a person who's like a bit scared of flying in an aeroplane. This would deeply stress me out. He also said, "I watched a large meteorite burn up between me and Australia, and to think of that hypersonic dumb lump of rock randomly hurtling into us instead sent a shiver up my back." Like, I'll say Chris, mate, Jesus. Coming into number 8, we have the formation. Gordon Cooper, the last American to spend time in space alone, has had a couple of very strange experiences in the skies. The first happened when he was a member of the Air Force. He was flying with other pilots in 1951 when he saw, I quote, "a vast armada of UFOs flying in formation at extremely high altitudes." I'm sorry, but vast armada, that is terrifying, not just one curious UFO, a whole fleet. On top of that, in 1963, Cooper was shot into space aboard a Mercury capsule to circumnavigate the world. As he was passing Perth, he noticed a fast-flying green object that was also picked up by Australian tracking systems. Now, the press were briefed that they were not allowed to talk to him about this. Why? Like, seriously, why? Coming into number 7, we have the check mark. American astronaut Leroy Chiao was the commander of the International Space Station in 2005. During his time up there, he saw some extremely weird things. He explained his encounter to the Huffington Post by saying, "I saw some lights that seemed to be in a line and it was almost like an upside down check mark, and I saw them fly by and I thought it was awfully strange." Could this have been the formation that Cooper was talking about? Some skeptics even tried to pass the lights off as far off fishing boat lights from Earth, but to be honest, I'm skeptical of those skeptics. Coming in at number 6, we have magnificent desolation. What is it like on the moon? Utterly terrifying according to Buzz Aldrin. Buzz, as we know, was the second man on the moon. Yes, televised recordings of the moon can be seen, and yes, we have high-res photographs, but truly knowing what it feels like to be up there is something only a handful of people can talk to us about. In a Reddit AMA, Buzz Aldrin describes his experience. He said, "My first words of my impression of being on the surface of the moon that just came to my mind are magnificent desolation." He continued by saying, "There is no place on Earth as desolate as what I was viewing in those first few moments on the lunar surface. Beyond me, I could see the moon curving away, no atmosphere, black sky, cold, colder than anyone could experience on Earth when the sun is up." While that sounds totally incredible, it also sounds like the beginnings of a total existential breakdown. Coming into number 5, we have the spheres. In 1981, following the Saljut mission, the USSR cosmonaut Major General Vladimir Kolyvanok gave a press conference in which he shared some very interesting information. He said that he looked out of a porthole and saw something he simply couldn't explain, something impossible to the laws of physics. He described the object he saw as spherical and elliptical, saying that it exploded into a beautiful golden light. After that, he saw 2 more spheres and a white smoke sphere cloud. Then, as they flew through the Terminator, the name for the zone between light and day, he lost sight of them. Honestly, how fascinating and terrifying at the very same time. To me, it's also weird and interesting how Russia appears to be more forthcoming in discussing things that they've seen in space, whereas the United States are keen to keep a lid on it. Why do you think the United States are so heavily guarded on what they'll say about what they've seen in space? Honestly, I don't know. Coming into number 4, we have the knocking. In 2003, Yang Liwei was the first Chinese astronaut to be propelled into space. Now I understand the loneliness of space might send you a little bit mad, but he said one night that he heard a strange and continuous knocking. He said, and I quote, "Someone was knocking on the body of the spaceship just as knocking an iron bucket with a wooden hammer. It neither came from outside nor inside the spaceship." I'm sorry, but honestly, what? Isn't that some of the creepiest space descriptions that you've ever heard? It seems he wasn't the last to hear it either. Two further astronauts heard the same space knocks when they went up there. What are these? Coming into number 3, we have the music. Listening to the transcript of the words said on board Apollo 10 is bone-chilling. The spaceship passed by the dark side of the moon, and as it did, the astronauts heard a very weird ethereal music. This is what was said between Eugene Cernan, Thomas Stafford, and John Young. That music sounds out of spacey, doesn't it? Do you hear that whistling sound? Yes. Boy, that sure is weird music. We're gonna have to find out about that. Nobody will believe us. Later, Cernan said, "That eerie music is what's bothering me. You know what? I hear it too." Who is going to believe it? Nobody. Shall we tell them about it? I don't know, I think we ought to think about it some. It seems that the Apollo 11 crew heard it too. What was it? We don't really know. Coming into number 2, we have heat is rising in the capsule. So this is really sad and really disturbing, so do skip forward if you aren't ready for something truly terrifying. In 1967, Russian cosmonaut Vladimir Komarov did not make it back to Earth alive, something he suspected would happen when he agreed to be the solo pilot of the Soyuz 1. His spacecraft malfunctioned and he was quite aware he was going to die. Some of the last things he said can't be translated into words. He was screaming and crying words of anger. Among the last words that can be deciphered are, "The heat is rising in the capsule" and "You've killed me." Honestly, that makes me so sad. Finally, coming into number 1, we have "They're watching us." Neil Armstrong, the first man on the moon, had something very scary to say when he arrived at the moon in the Apollo 11 mission. It was something he spoke about once but never spoke about again. In a secret transmission to NASA, according to the retired chief of communications system Maurice Chatelain, the first man on the moon's first words were actually, "Oh God, you won't believe it. I'm telling you, there are other spacecraft out here lined up on the far side of the crater's edge. They're on the moon watching us." Now this wasn't heard by the world as the broadcast was dropped for 2 minutes. Armstrong never spoke about it again, although a lot of credible sources have confirmed that this is what he said.
In our number 10 spot, we have exploding objects. On May 5th, 1981, cosmonauts Vladimir Kovalanek and Viktor Savink were flying over South Africa when an object flew at their ship. The object flew and then exploded. Apparently Vladimir was doing some gymnastic exercises when he looked through a porthole and saw an object he could not explain. This is a direct quote from Vladimir. "It is impossible to determine distances in space. A small object can appear large and far away and the other way around. Anyway, I saw this object and I called over Victor, and then something happened I could not explain, something impossible according to the laws of physics. The object had this shape, elliptical, and flew with us. From a frontal view, it looked like it would rotate in flight direction. It only flew straight, but then a kind of explosion happened, very beautiful to watch, of golden light. This was the first part. Then, 1 or 2 seconds later, a second explosion followed somewhere else, and 2 spheres appeared, golden and very beautiful. After this explosion, I just saw white smoke, then a cloud-like sphere. Before we entered the darkness, we flew through the terminator, the twilight zone between day and night. We flew eastwards, and when we entered the darkness of the Earth's shadow, I could not see them any longer. The 2 spheres never returned. Vlad and Victor have commented that it was probably a UFO, because it was definitely not mysticism. 2 people watched it at the same time. In our number 9 spot, we have the unidentified object. In 1995, astronaut Catherine Katie Coleman was on board the US Space Shuttle Columbia during its STS-73 mission when she said, "We have an unidentified flying object." Look, that is a very serious joke. As an alien believer myself, okay, I'm like a borderline a believer. But anyways, if I was listening to this and heard her say that, I would freak out and believe it to be true. And so did so many people around the world when they heard her say that. Apparently she eventually told the world that it was a joke, and you know, I can believe it to be a joke, but I could also believe that perhaps she was told to say that it's a joke because the government doesn't want people to know that aliens are real. Anyways, regardless, we'll never know the real truth anyway. But what do you think? Was she actually joking, or was she told to lie? Leave a comment and tell me your thoughts in the comment section below. In our number 8 spot, we have the Great Wall of China. I had to include this one because it's dark up there in space. So the astronaut was technically dark too, so therefore, this is a dark astronaut urban legend. Just love me. Anyways, while in space, astronaut Yang Liwei wanted to discover whether you could see the Great Wall of China, because as the legend goes, you apparently can see it from space. In fact, the belief is that it is the only man-made structure that is visible. But unfortunately, that is just not true. I know, how sad, right? It actually terrifies me that after this was proven untrue, that the Guinness Book of Records people weren't on this. They should be planning some kind of structure that can be seen from space, because otherwise, what is their purpose? Tell me. That would be the ultimate record to break and record. In our number 7 spot, we have the flying saucers. This is a story told by cosmonaut Georgi Greco, who witnessed flying saucers while on the Salyut 6 station. Georgi has said, "It all started when I saw the flying saucers and I got scared. I looked out of the Salyut 6 orbital station viewpoint and saw that we were being followed by saucers. They were moving in a clearly defined formation and occasionally flickered with red lights. So I said to my crew commander, Yuri, look, here they come." He smiled and said that it was just dust that had come off the station coating when we corrected our orbit. But Georgie performed an experiment to show that it was not dust, and later on he went on to see them again, and this time there were more witnesses with him. This is wild, but honestly I totally believe it. It's silly to think that we're the only intelligent life to exist in the universe. I don't know, maybe it's just me. In our number 6 spot, we have glowing particles. Astronaut John Glenn was in his first orbital flight on the Mercury 6 when he came across something strange. The spacecraft was in orbit, and when the sun came out, he said that he was surrounded by thousands of small glowing particles that were moving alongside the ship, spinning around. He has said that he had never seen anything like it before. Alien spaceships, he thought. Well, he later discovered that the particles were small pieces of ice. You know, the product of hydrogen peroxide decomposition in the attitude engines. Apparently, it was a while before he learned this, so it must have been really hard to have this truth sink in. Darn, well, this story did seem promising, but sadly no alien discovery here. Although, if it were aliens, would he not be terrified, as I guess he would have been surrounded by a fleet of them? In our number 5 story, we have pink fireflies. In the mid-70s, apparently the American Skylab space station had a UFO sighting. During his 3rd expedition to the station, Bill Pogue went on a spacewalk, which is, yes, a walk outside the space station in space. Pretty terrifying. On one of his walks on November 22nd, 1973, he noticed something weird. There was apparently a dim light not too far from the planet. Suddenly, his partner Ed Gibson said, "Look at those things. Are those UFOs? There are hundreds of them." Bill looked in the direction that his partner was pointing in, and he saw a ton, maybe even hundreds, of flying objects that looked like fireflies, pink and purple, with a bit of a metallic tint. After a while of pure astonishment, skepticism kicked in, and Bill had an epiphany that made him laugh out loud. He said, "These UFOs are pieces of plastic insulation that I had cut off when I removed the junction box. The aluminum was the metallic appearance that reflected the light." Well, darn. Well, it sounds like that was probably for the best, because they weren't even inside their spaceship. They could have been blasted into space if it were. In our number 4 spot, we have the moon landing was fake. Okay, this is an urban legend known everywhere around the world, and honestly, there's no way to actually prove that it is true or not. All we can do is trust in our government that they're telling us the truth and not lying to us. They never lie, so why would they lie about this? Well, all jokes aside, some people believe that the moon landing was faked in a studio, and the reason, concluded, wouldn't be above a human ego motivating factor. To be able to say that we were the first people to get to the moon in the minds of the world, that would be motivating. At this point, I think a lot of people believe that we have gone to the moon many times, but still there are a lot of people who truly wonder if Neil Armstrong really was the first. Well, unless some footage gets released showing him in a studio, then I'm sure we'll never really know for sure. In our number 3 spot, we have Good Luck, Mr. Gorsky. Astronaut Neil Armstrong, the first man to walk walk on the moon, famously uttered these words while walking on the moon. "Good luck, Mr. Gorsky." These words had the world in a frenzy trying to figure out who Mr. Gorsky was, and no one was ever able to locate him or figure out who he was. Some thought maybe it was someone on the set of the moon production. Obviously, these people believed that the landing was faked. Some thought it was an alien friend. Apparently, Neil once said that Mr. Gorsky was his neighbor as a child, and his neighbor's wife was shouting at her husband about something intimate, and that he will only get what he wants when the kid next door lands on the moon. Well, that would be pretty crazy if the story were true, but apparently there is no proof, as NASA has released their transcripts and they don't even show Neil saying that at all, and some think he was just joking. In our number 2 spot we have CoMunion. This is an urban legend that after further investigation I have concluded seems to be true. It's not necessarily dark, and I'm not sure it would terrify you unless you're afraid of religion, which fair enough, I'm sure there's someone watching that is, but I wanted to include it because it's kind of a cute story. Apparently in 1969, when Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin landed on the moon, Buzz had his own little communion and ate bread and wine provided by his church back home and recited a few words for the ceremony. He has a CoMunion. Get it? Get it? He didn't recite too much though, because apparently there were some legal issues against NASA when the Apollo 8 crew recited from Genesis years prior, but he thought the symbology of the first food and drink eaten on the moon was interesting though, as it was the food and drink of the son of the person who created the moon and earth. Interesting, but honestly, the most interesting thing to me here is the fact that I think I just realized who Buzz Lightyear was named after. Mind blown. In our number 1 spot we have knocking on Yang's door. Knock knock knocking on Yang's door. Everything's a song in my head. In 2003, Yang Liwei became the first Chinese astronaut in space. In 2016, Yang said he heard someone knocking on the outside of his spaceship. He tried to look outside of the ship through a peephole, but of course no one was there. He tried to describe and even demonstrate the sound for people when he got back home, but of course no conclusion could have been made. Some hypothesize that it could be the expanding and contracting of the ship due to the ever-changing temperature of the ship as it orbits the Earth. People of course also think that it's probably time travelers from other spaceships in time, or, aliens. I say most likely both.
Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have an organic object. Leland Melvin is an American engineer and retired NASA astronaut who served on board the space shuttle Atlantis as a mission specialist. He is an incredibly brilliant man with an incredible resume, and that is exactly why this story is so unnerving. He claimed that, while on a space mission as he was orbiting Earth, which, for the record, how cool would it be able to tell a story that happened while you were orbiting Earth? It would be the only story I told for the rest of my life. But anyway, while he was on this mission, he said he saw a, quote, alien-like organic object. NASA disputed his claims and said that what he saw was just ice, but I feel like I trust the person who actually saw it with their own eyes. Leland went on to write that whatever he saw was, quote, translucent, curved, organic looking. I have no explanations to offer, but I will say it certainly is interesting and kind of terrifying. In our number 9 spot today we have DNA difference. Scott Kelly is an engineer, a naval aviator, and a former NASA astronaut, and for his interesting discovery on this list we have one that happened while he was in space, of course, but the results of it weren't really discovered until he was back here on Earth. Scott has a twin brother who is called Mark. While Scott was on a year-long mission aboard the International Space Station, Mark was, of course, here on Earth. Once Scott returned from his lengthy mission, him and Mark were both subjected to a 2-year-long study because, of course, since they were twins, it presented an interesting scenario. After the study concluded, NASA confirmed that 7% of Scott's genes were different. So basically, it was discovered that space changes your DNA. That's so wild, and it also makes me really wonder, even more than ever before, what other life forms out there look like then. While some of Scott's DNA expressions will change back to a closer version of what they were prior, it won't ever be 100% the same as it was before. In our number 8 spot today we have ocean maps. Gordon Cooper had an exceptional life and career as an aerospace engineer, test pilot, United States Air Force pilot, and he was the youngest of the 7 original astronauts in Project Mercury, which was the first human space program of the United States. It truly is astonishing, and the things he was able to accomplish, and one of the things he did, led to a dark discovery right here on Earth. While Gordon was up in space orbiting Earth in 1963, he began to make some maps. This was inspired by these dark spots that he observed in the Caribbean Sea. Later, a friend of Gordon, Darrell Miklos, who was an explorer, took these maps and began searching these locations that Gordon had marked as places of interest. Darrell thought he was going to find an ancient shipwreck, but instead, he found something that continues to stump researchers and Darrell himself. He came across a very strange structure that wasn't like anything that he had seen before. This structure had long obtrusions which stuck out from the sides, and the whole thing was covered in coral, so whatever this thing is, it has been down there for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Darrell has said, quote, "There's identical formations in 3 different areas, and they don't look nature-made, they don't look man-made, certainly nothing I've ever seen based on my experience, and I have years of experience at doing this. We've identified multiple different types of shipwreck material. This doesn't match or look anything like that." People have started speculating that this structure may just be the remains of a crashed UFO. If it isn't that, what else could it be? I'm feeling pretty open to suggestions. In our number 7 spot today, we have the space snake. Dr. Franklin Story Musgrave is an American physician and retired NASA astronaut, and considering how credible he tends to be, despite the absurdities of this story, it makes it hard to pass off as a lie so easily. While he was in space, he claims that I saw something I don't wish upon anyone, a sort of space snake. He said that he saw an 8-foot-long white snake floating through space. I don't even know what I would do. Probably cry? Call Houston? I'm not sure. There are many people who think that this was simply just a detached hose from the spaceship, but Dr. Musgrave remains adamant on what he saw, and to be completely honest, I believe him. Maybe his mind was playing tricks on him. I mean, I don't know what happens in space, but I find it hard to believe that this person, who would likely be familiar with the parts of the spacecraft, mistook a hose for a snake. Also, how would they not notice an 8-foot-long hose missing? Again, I'm certainly no astronaut, it just seems strange. In our number 6 spot today, we have animals. It is well known that prior to human spaceflight becoming a thing, in order to test out what space would do to a living being, we instead sent a monkey and a dog in our place first in order to study the effects. Morally, it's not the greatest thing we've done. In fact, it's horrible, but this has gone on to have an incredible impact on our ability to research space, and the sacrifices those animals unfortunately unwillingly made has not gone on in vain. This has, however, created quite a grim situation for some astronauts. Many of the animals sent to space were sent there with no plans of survival or even recovery. Yep, that means that there are animal corpses floating through space as I make this video and as you watch it. How terrible! It has been said that unfortunately sometimes the astronauts on space missions have to encounter these grim situations, but I'm sure it makes them all the more grateful for the sacrifice and the terrible things that these animals must have endured. In our number 5 spot today, we have this mysterious video. In 1991, the cosmonaut Musa Manarov was on a mission in space when he captured a video that has been raising questions ever since. I'll show the video first, and then we can discuss. Do you have any idea what that is just floating out in the middle of absolute nothingness? Well, neither do I, so we're on the same page. Whatever this shiny cylindrical object is, it has been stumping us for decades since the video was captured. There is even a CIA document that refers to this story and how strange and unexplainable it is. Maybe it's like the snake and it could just be a part of their spacecraft that had come off, but what if it's not? At this point, we may never know for sure. In our number 4 spot today, we have giant moon babies. You think I'm kidding, but just wait. Since the moon landing, conspiracy theorists have gone absolutely wild. Of course, we have the popular theory of how the moon landing never actually happened and that it was all shot in a studio. That's probably the most well-known one, but the one I'm about to tell you is perhaps the most terrifying and also my favorite. So this conspiracy mystery suggests that the moon landing was real, which it was. don't get mad at me. And it starts off in 1969 after Armstrong had successfully landed on the moon. During this monumental Apollo 11 mission, NASA claims to have lost transmission for about 2 minutes, and those 2 minutes are gold for conspiracy theorists. There are people out there who believe that this quote transmission interruption is actually just a cover-up for a secret message that Neil was sending back to NASA. It is said that he said, quote, "These babies were huge, sir, enormous. Oh god, you wouldn't believe it. I'm telling you, there are other spacecrafts out here lined up on the far side of the crater's edge. They're on the moon watching us. I don't know who they are or why their babies are so big, but this is perhaps the most bizarre space conspiracy theory I have ever heard. I mean, I wasn't there, so who am I to say that Neil Armstrong didn't discover giant alien moon babies, you know?" And our number 3 spot today, we have the lights. Leroy Chiao was the commander of the ISS in 2005, and this is exactly when this strange sighting occurred. It is said that he wasn't the only one who witnessed this, however, as it is said that the entire crew was there to see this unexplainable occurrence along with him. Basically, it is said that they saw a strange set of lights while up in space. He went on to describe the lights and said that they were in a formation of an upside down V, and that they ended up just stumbling upon this bizarre situation after the formation flew past them. I'm just gonna say it, we're all thinking it, that sounds a lot like aliens. I just don't have any other possible explanations, and you're telling me that the whole crew saw it? I swear, nothing will convince me of aliens more than an astronaut's first-hand account. In our number 2 spot today, we have glowing green. Back with another Gordon Cooper story, this time it's about something he witnessed in space and only in space. On May 15th, 1963, he was sent off into space in a Mercury capsule for a 22-orbit journey around the Earth, and while on this journey, he saw something extremely unsettling. A glowing green object that would approach his capsule. During his final orbit, he did tell the tracking station of this object that was quickly approaching his capsule, and they were able to pick up this UFO on their radar, but once Cooper landed, reporters were told that he was not allowed to answer any questions regarding this UFO. It is even more interesting considering how Gordon has been a vocal and firm believer in UFOs even before he was an astronaut. So I ask, what do you guys think this was? In our number 1 spot today, we have the knock. Okay, space is a vacuum, right? So it should be silent, right? We've all heard about space roar, the alleged unsettling noise of space, but for the most part, it should be relatively silent. That is exactly what makes this story the plot of a horror movie, in my opinion. Back in 2003, Yang Lue became the first astronaut sent into space by the Chinese space program. That's an amazing accomplishment and likely a very exciting adventure, so imagine his surprise when, as he's sitting in his space shuttle, he hears a knock. He described it as, quote, "someone knocking the body of this spaceship just as knocking an iron bucket with a wooden hammer." Okay, perhaps we could just chalk this up to some extremely reasonable explanation, but he's not the only one who's heard it. There were other Chinese astronauts between 2005 and 2008 who reported hearing similar sounds, and it's not like you can just open up the door to check. Next thing up, we need Ring doorbells for space shuttles, apparently.
Number 10. Al Warden. American test pilot, engineer, and NASA astronaut Alfred Merrill Warden. He was the module pilot for the Apollo 15 lunar mission back in 1971. Now, after Apollo 15 reached lunar orbit, Warden spent 3 days alone in said module. Just space things, just journaling out some space thoughts. Traveling the furthest out there from any other human ever. It's a lonely road, I'm betting. After Al returned, the crew and him became involved in a NASA controversy over postage stamps that they had taken to the moon. Yeah, it turns out you can't litter there as well. Can't litter here nor there. Littering's bad everywhere. That rhymed. Let's hit that thumbs up. I don't know. They were reprimanded by NASA and did not fly in space ever again because of postage stamps. Or was there something else involved? Warner remained at NASA until 1975, and then he entered the private sector. And then it gets a little weird. On a British television morning show, when Al Warden was asked about why we should return to the moon, he replied, "Survival of our species." That's always odd when an astronaut says that, huh? When asked about alien life existing out there, Al's response was to get books on the ancient Sumerians and see what they had to say about it. Do you feel like Al Warden saw some shit I feel like Al Warden saw some shit. Number 9. Edgar Mitchell. US Navy officer, aviator, test pilot, engineer, all that good stuff. And most importantly, NASA astronaut. He was a lunar module pilot of Apollo 14 back in 1971, and he spent 9 hours working on the lunar surface. He was the 6th person to walk on the moon. He was walking while Warden was up there drifting in the currents of space. So that's a dream team right there. Mitchell publicly expressed his opinions that he was sure that the thousands of UFOs that he saw belonged to other planets. Again, thousands of UFOs that he saw in space. So I can't breathe. That's very scary. Dateline NBC conducted an interview with Mitchell in 1996 where he talked about meeting officials from 3 different countries who all claimed to have met extraterrestrials in person at some point. It's a lot of officials and a lot of meetings with a lot of weird handshakes, I bet. In 2004, he told the St. Petersburg Times that the US government was studying alien bodies. In 2008, Mitchell was interviewed and he claims that the Roswell crash was indeed real and that aliens have contacted humans several times, but the government's hidden the truth now for 60 years. Yeah, he sadly passed away in 2016, so we can't ask him any more questions. But do we believe? Do we? I kinda do. I don't know. James Webb? He definitely believes. Number 8. Chris Hadfield. Retired Canadian astronaut, engineer, fighter pilot, and musician. Oh, okay. In 1992, Chris Hadfield was accepted into the Canadian astronaut program. He first flew in space in 1995, and since then, he's seen tons of stuff up there, just zipping around apparently. He says he can't explain it, but he also isn't running with it. He says, quote, "To see something in the sky that you don't understand, and then to immediately conclude that it's an intelligent life form from another solar system, is the height of foolishness and lack of logic." End quote. Also, end roast. Oh my god. However, he thinks that there could potentially be alien life, and that is in the clouds of Venus, or on the distant moons of one of our gas giants. That's his best guess, so honestly, yeah. Fair, more than fair. Number 7, James McDevitt. James McDevitt is an American test pilot, Air Force pilot, engineer, and NASA astronaut who flew in both the Gemini and Apollo programs. That's a fat resume right there. It's good God, nice. After graduating first in his class with a Bachelor of Science degree in aeronautical engineering, in 1962 McDevitt was selected by NASA for the Gemini 4 mission. And in 1965 he saw, filmed, and photographed an object, which apparently approached the Gemini 4 as they were orbiting Earth. Now this all happened right over Hawaii. Major James McDevitt describes this as a cylindrical object that was white with a long arm that stuck out on the side. The film was sent back to NASA and reviewed by some NASA film technicians, but once it was returned, it was not the same photo. This one was a photo of sun reflection on the window. Yeah, the old NASA swap. Gotcha. We got the secret one here, tucked away in that secret Vault app on our iPod Touch. That's where that photo is. Do we believe this? I don't know, I kinda do. In 1975, McDevitt said it was something he definitely couldn't identify. It looked like a beer can with a pencil sticking out of it, so party on, dude. 25 years of experience. What could you possibly seen? I don't know, now I'm questioning my existence. Number 6, Spaceman. Okay, we've all been photobombed before. It's a blessing in disguise, right? But when Jim Templeton took a photo of his daughter in an empty marsh long before Photoshop existed, it appears an astronaut photobombed this family moment. Now Jim assures us that nobody was around, which I believe, or else what a weird photo to take in an empty field, right? It's weird in all parties. Also, the fact that this man looks like he's from space makes it a bit more believable, makes it a bit more jarring to look at. What are we seeing right now? This is so creepy. Kodak, like, you know, the photo company Kodak, they got involved in the story. They confirmed this photo wasn't tampered with. Yeah, let's run everything by Kodak from now on, I guess. They're so confident. They're like, no, it's fake. I'm like, how do you know? Oh my god. Mr. Kodak, stop. Number 5, Black Knight satellite. Not to be confused with Martin Lawrence's Black Knight, although that's pretty historical and memorable in itself, but a little different. The Black Knight satellite is something that's been orbiting our planet for thousands of years, apparently. And we still question its existence and, you know, where it came from. Alien astronaut from the future trying to warn Earth? That's a good theory I read. Sure, why not? Let's lean into there. I buy it. This photo you've probably seen at one point or another. It was taken back in 1998 during an American mission to the International Space Station. Now during a spacewalk in 98, one of the thermal covers came loose and drifted away from the station. So could this be that cover? If so, what did it catch onto? And why does everybody want it to be an alien night so badly? These photos shared originally by NASA look a lot different than a solar sail. I'll happily admit, it looks like an alien. Number 4, the time traveler. Do you believe in time travel? If your answer is no, just go back to the beginning of this video and then, you know, there you go, you've done it. Fooled me somehow. If your answer is no, maybe this will change your mind. I don't know. It's a common theme in movies. You see it in Back to the Future, Looper, Avengers. Time travel plots are fun, but they're absolute obviously. But when we see a case like the Cape Scott story, we can't help but be intrigued a little, right? We want to believe just a bit. Could it be? Is it possible? This is an interesting photo. Let's talk about it. It comes from Ray Peterson's book, The Great Cape Scott story. Now that book was from 1974, but the actual photo in it was taken over 100 years ago from our date right now. In this photo, we see this modern looking guy, rocking shorts, messy morning surfer hair. He looks kind of cool, I don't know, the dude looks like Tony Stark. He looks casual as shit. He doesn't look like he's from that time period at all. Now many believe he's an astronaut or a time traveler who got stuck in time and just went with it, which is half hilarious but also half terrifying. That's not an early 1900s man, there's no chance. Don't they all have monocles and big mustaches and walk with a cane? I don't know. I'm watching a lot of Peaky Blinders right now. Maybe that's what I'm thinking of. Number 3, Gordon Cooper. Leroy Gordon Cooper, Jr. He's an American aerospace engineer, test pilot, US Air Force pilot, you name it. And he's the youngest of the 7 original astronauts in Project Mercury, aka the first human space program of the United States. Not too shabby. In Cooper's autobiography, Leap of Faith, he recounts his experiences with the Air Force and NASA and a UFO conspiracy. We love those. Cooper claimed to have seen his first UFO while flying over Germany. Cooper also claimed that up until his death that the US was covering up many UFO operations. He said there were hundreds of reports made by his fellow pilots as well, and many of them coming from military pilots on radar. In his memoirs, Cooper wrote that he had seen unexplained aircraft many times throughout his career, and in 1978 he actually testified before the United Nations on the topic. Put your hand on a book for aliens? That's crazy. That's what now? Number 2, Buzz Aldrin. Yes, the astronaut who punches back. We love Buzz Aldrin. American astronaut, engineer, fighter pilot with a doctorate of science in astronautics. You lose this street fight every day, my friend. Mr. Aldrin performed 3 spacewalks in 1966, and of course in 1969, he did the Apollo 11 mission, where he and Neil Armstrong were the first 2 people ever to land on the moon. Now Buzz said that he saw something out there. He's confident. Close enough to be observed, so, you know. Quote, I observed a light out the window that appeared to be moving alongside us. What could that be other than a spacecraft from another country or another world? It was either the rocket that had separated from us or the 4 panels that moved away when we extracted the lander, right? End quote. He asks us, I'm like, I don't know, I wasn't up there, man. No idea. I've seen Gravity, I have no idea what you're talking about. After he returned from his missions, he was convinced that he saw aliens while he was out there. He took a lie detector test after talking about this incident and he passed. So that's jarring. Buzz thinks that there's a monolith on Phobos, which is one of the moons that orbits Mars. It actually orbits it every 7 hours. Buzz thinks there's a monolith just sitting there. He says when people find out about that, they're gonna say, who put that there? Okay, great question. Who put this giant monolith there on that moon? Was it aliens? Future humans? Was it Buzz Aldrin? Who knows? And finally, number 1, Michael Collins. NASA veteran and the very first driver up there, Mr. Michael Collins, served as command module pilot on the historic Apollo 11 mission back in 1969. Now, when Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walked on the moon for the first time, Collins was parking. He was just hanging up. He was feeding the meter, for lack of a better term, while everyone else was, hopping around. Mr. Collins stayed up there by himself in lunar orbit, waiting for the safe return of his crewmates. Just by himself. That's terrifying. The astronaut retired from NASA in 1970, and he spent his time answering questions on Twitter, because that's pretty fun. That's what some astronauts do, I guess, now. And some of these questions were really interesting. Are we alone? Hashtag Ask Michael Collins. He wrote in his book saying things like, quote, I am alone now, truly alone and absolutely isolated from any known life. Although I may feel like I am the same person, I also feel like I'm different from other people. I've been places and done things you simply would not believe. Collins circled the moon once every 2 hours, so what could he possibly have seen out there alone? Hey, what's scarier, walking on an unknown rock that apparently no one has ever visited, or flying all the way around it by yourself in the pitch black with no communications? I would say the latter, definitely the latter. I would not want to sit in the dark room. I can't even sit in my bedroom alone in the dark, let alone orbit a fucking moon. No way.